Hey, my friends, welcome to this week's podcast. Today I have my friends and amazing handpan maker Victor on here from Handromeda Handpan, and he made me a crazy instrument, Lunaria scale,
Maria.
custom beast 18-note instrument. And it's definitely one of the more interesting and probably challenging instruments that I have, but it's so much potential here. So fantastic instrument. So thank you for being on, Victor. I appreciate you
Yeah.
being here.
Thank you for the opportunity to this moment. So let's chat.
All right. So where are you making instruments from? What country are you in right now?
I'm from Brazil, São Paulo, Brazil, more precisely.
Yeah.
And it's in the core of the city, São Paulo.
Yeah.
Almost in downtown.
Nice.
And yeah.
Are there a lot of handpan makers in like South America or Brazil, or no, not so much?
Brazil, it's growing. Now we have about 10 makers.
Yeah.
Most of them used to be here in São Paulo, but now they are used to have one here about a couple weeks ago, but he moved away to another city, and the other ones are on the beach and other parts of Brazil. So, but the majority of the makers are from São Paulo here.
Okay.
The first one, the first one that started here on Brazil, he's from another state, and now it's called Rio Grande do Sul. And now he's on another state called Minas Gerais. The first one, and first guy. And after that, the most of the makers they are from here.
Gotcha.
São Paulo.
What was your first introduction to the handpan or the hong? Like, what was the first one that you ever saw, if you can remember?
Was from a YouTube video.
Yeah.
I was funny. I was searching for street artists. I used to play violin, so I was looking for street artists because I wanted to perform on street. Something that I interested to, and then seeing a couple of videos of violin, and I pair with a video from Daniel Waffles.
Yeah.
And playing on streets of Edinburgh. And that moment was very special. That was the first first contact with the instrument. And that time I knew that I wanted to have one of those.
I think a lot of people
and also making.
Yes, yeah. I feel like a lot
of
people
also making
that first experience online with Daniel Waffles or
Hang Massive.
Yeah, Hang Massive. Yeah, it's funny how the first group of hong players were really the ones that like put it out into the world for people to see. When was the first time you touched a handpan? Like, did you make one without playing one yet, or did you go to like?
No. The first one years ago. This moment that I saw this video was 2011.
Okay.
And the first one that I bought was 2015 or 2016. Yeah.
What was
the first time?
What was the first scale that you ever played?
Celtic.
Nice.
The Celtic minor.
Classic scale.
I wanted the Daniel Waffle scale, but the maker. Now I know him. I talk with him sometimes, and it was a dimpless instrument. I have here actually. Yeah, dimpless instrument, but the ding has a dimple. But
Was it a sun
notes?
Was it a sun?
No.
Those are
No.
dimples too, I think. Or maybe the small dimples in there. That's interesting.
I can show you if you want.
I'd love to
show you.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. You want to grab it right now?
If you want to, sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Just a moment. Maybe you could hear me.
I can hear you. Yes. Oh,
there you go.
Wow. Huh. Who is the maker? Does the maker still make instruments, or?
Actually, it was two makers,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a company called Awa.
Okay.
Or Awa. I don't really know exactly.
Yeah.
And they both have their own.
I see.
Company.
I see.
But they're still producing. Yeah.
Interesting. It looks beautiful. It's so interesting to see it without dimples, because it feels like a different instrument almost to see it that way.
Yeah. And the timbre, it's also different.
Interesting.
Sounds nice.
Like it has almost the sustain of a stainless instrument. It's very long. The harmonics are very clear, at least.
Pronounced. Yeah. Oh, this was the first one. Wow. And when I opened the box, I did this, and wow! I can't believe it.
That's amazing. I think my first exposure to a handpan was probably on one of those videos, but when I was a child, I grew up in Antigua in the West Indies. So I used to hear steel drum all the time.
Steel drum all the time.
And I never really thought about that until maybe the last 4 or 5 years. But I think that's part of my love for that sound, is that I grew up listening to steel drum.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of an extension of that.
Uh-huh.
When you got that instrument, how long until you started to learn to tune, and like what was your process for learning how to make them?
Yeah, I wanted to have one instrument before I really start on the thing, but since from 2011 I was studying a lot about it through the forum, Handpan.org. And I wanted to have this first experience almost like to guide me in some of the stuff. And I think 1 year later, I started to try some things, sync a drum. I sunk a drum in front of my old house, like with it's funny because I thought that a rubber mallet would do the job. So I sunk a drum with a rubber mallet.
Oh my god!
It took me like 4 weekends, 4 or 5 weekends, just to make the bow shape. So, but it was very smooth. But it took me forever to, and the neighbors must have been crazy about it because it was very loud. And after that, I started to gather material. I used to work with my dad, and in the part time, I used to try some things. set up the first place that I rent to try, and I started to scrap some shells.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How long for you until you felt like you had one that you were happy with? Like how long from
Okay.
starting to hammer to getting to the point where you're like, I like this?
Okay.
Roughly.
Not exactly like, but it was like okay prototype.
Yeah.
It was 2018. In the end of 2018, I had my first prototype that this is kind of a handpan.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I could understand more about the tuning. It was more clear to me.
Yeah.
And I had help from other makers, and I visit one maker that started like with the same amount of time as myself. He started in 2016 or 17, like year, but he was full time. I wasn't full time, so he was ahead of me. And then I got there in his workshop, and we shared some information. And in the end of 2018, I got this first prototype.
Yeah.
But it was like before that, this first one, it was like almost lost in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
After this one, it's a mind blown, because it was a moment that I figured out how things work.
Interesting. I think that in all of the handpan makers that I've talked to so far, that's kind of been their process. They made some instruments that were, or there was a process where all of a sudden they got to a point and they're like, aha, I figured out this part of the building process or this part of the tuning process. I think
until this day, actually, I learn almost every week something new that I have to write on it.
Yeah, that's smart. That's good to keep track of that too. I think probably the longer you work with a material, the more you understand, what's going on there. What do you find different orders of metal? Or do you form the shells there, or do you purchase?
Yes. Right here.
I like that. I like. So I actually like that you do that.
My Hydroformed machine.
Smart, very smart. I think it's neat when makers create their own shells. I understand why people don't, because it is a very time and labor intensive
consuming. Yeah.
But I think that they sound more unique when they're using their own shells. I think this sort of the timbre of instruments can be similar if everyone's using the same type of shells. So I always like when people have ones that are more unique to them. Obviously, the tuning changes the timbre as well, but there's something fun about instruments that are done by the maker, or formed by the maker.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I agree.
Did you?
But I wanted to have shells ready though.
Smart, yeah.
Because it's very it's time consuming. Now it's really good because you just put on the sheet metal on the machine and just go up. But even though it's time consuming, right?
Yeah, I feel like that part of it seems like it's very labor intensive. If you're doing that by hand, I could see how you would destroy your hands very quickly, hand sinking shells all the time. Do you notice a difference between the sound of a hand sunk instrument and a hydroformed instrument? Like, or tuning wise, is it any different to tune one that you've hand hammered out versus one that's hydroformed?
Yeah, I feel some differences. even more in instruments that are low scales.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel more about that. But it's funny because I never made a one instrument totally hand sung. When I achieve my first prototype, and after that, it was just hydroformed. I couldn't make one instrument before that was hand sung. I used to sync my shells, but I never did full hand sunk.
Gotcha.
It's a project that I wanted to do. Sync a shell and see what happens.
Yeah,
but hearing from video, I can see hear the differences.
And I think that kind of happened with some of the makers who swapped from like rolling their shells. Some makers were using rollers, some were using presses. But I think it seems like Hydroformed is a good mix of all of those sounds. It seems pretty even in its sound. I know there's some makers I've heard that when they swapped to a new process, the instrument sounded completely different, or it sounded like the quality of the sound was different. So
and how you have to shape it. For sure. The problem with the hydroform is because is that the top part it's thinner than the sides. That's why some makers make a system that there's some slipping on the sides, like almost this size. I couldn't make it on my machine right now, but I study how I'm gonna do it. Some instruments, stainless, I achieved that in some parts of the shell. So the lower notes I put right on this part that is slipped, and the high ones no.
Interesting. I've noticed that on some, like I have a stainless steel handpan that has that slip on it. The edge where it's scraped against the rim, I guess, that it's attached to. Have you, when you were learning tuning, how did you go about discovering that? You said the handpan forums were a big information source for you. Did you have makers that were kind of willing to share their shaping and tuning with you, or was it just kind of figuring it out as you went?
Yes. Like I said, I had help. But in the end, is experience with your own path, because you can't really show exactly how the person has to figure that out. You have to hammer and discover things out. But guidance, of course, will be a great leap in the time. So it was like just every day I was learning something new, a bit here, a bit there, and there's a how to say it. There's an expression on the handpan world that you can't tune if you don't shape, if you don't know how to shape, and you don't know how to shape if you don't know how to tune. So you're basically lost, really lost at the beginning.
That's interesting. It is interesting, just from my reading and sort of watching things on shaping and tuning. It seems like those two processes are so important for getting a stable note And when do you find when you're tuning, is there a certain timbre or like sort of color of sound that you look for when you're tuning your instruments?
Mhm.
Like what are you
Mhm.
looking for when you're tuning sound wise, aside from just being in tune?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Right now, I'm more into it in this past year because we are learning every day. So now, right now, I always try to reach a tone that has more of a fundamental,
Hmm.
sustainable fundamental, and less on fifth.
Okay.
Um, so I when I tune, I look for that timbre and I listen to the sound of the note when I'm tuning,
Yeah. Yeah.
and now I'm understanding more how to control because it's way easier to know learn how to tune, even though it's harder. Then you have to learn how to control the timbre.
Yeah.
So the how to control the timbre, it's a process of years.
Yeah.
You're refining your tone, you're refining um, your how notes relate to each other. More you want more sympathy or less sympathy. You want more isolation. You want more um, like I search for more of sustainable fundamental or no my or
Hmm.
more harmonics. So it's really a search for from each maker.
Yeah.
That's why it's so great to have a lot of makers because you have a lot of possibilities from the sound.
It's interesting how different, even if people are just using IASA shells or whatever shells people are purchasing, it's amazing to me that the shaping and tuning process still, even though it's the same material, it can make them sound completely different. You know, different sustain, different harmonic.
Yes. Yeah, material has a good parts on that. Like you said, if a lot of makers are using the same material, you have um, sounds that are more similar to each other. But a great part of the timbre is from each maker. Like there's shaping system, their tuning style,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of methods, different methods.
Yeah.
My method that I use cannot work to another maker maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When I sometimes I watch videos of from other makers tuning. I got what I I don't know. I don't know what he's doing. you know, because his tune is so different than me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, there's a lot of ways to get the same spots.
Mm.
Like I do. I'm sorry.
No,
Go.
sorry. No, I always found it interesting when people were like swapping shells for a while. Like I think Pantheon Steel and Mackay or different places were swapping shells. So a maker would send their shell to another tuner and have them tune on their shell, and then they'd swap it back. It was interesting to hear the difference in sound. But
Yeah, that's a good idea.
yeah, it's
That's
kind of
a
fun.
good idea
Hmm.
to make some collaboration like that.
And it shows you how unique and how their particular tuning style affects the sounds. Like one of the videos that I saw, Kyle from Pantheon Steel tuned. I think it was a Mackay, but it was an instrument that didn't have a super long sustain, and maybe just because of his tuning style and his approach, this instrument had a lot of sustain, even though it was still shaped by the other maker. So super interesting. I find that.
Yeah.
The tuning process is really, really interesting.
Yeah, how you tune affects a lot on that, on sustain, on stability, and harmonics, and volume.
Yeah.
But what I found about sustain and volume too, it's a good part on the shaping.
Mm-hmm.
How you expand. I like to expand a lot the shell. It's my personal taste.
Yeah.
Some makers like, some don't.
Yeah.
But like we were saying about how each maker tunes, I find really crazy how Sean from
Symphonic.
Yes, Symphonic Steel. Yeah, he's crazy, man. He's crazy. It's just take a shell with dimples and start to tune, shape and tune in the same process. Like hammer, and the note is coming alive just in hammer blows that he do. So it's crazy. It's crazy how actually it's a style that is very used on steel pans. He was a steel pan guy.
Yeah.
He learned to tune with steel pans, I believe.
Right. It's interesting how some makers had that background. And I think you can almost hear it a little bit in the sound of their instruments, like Dave Barry from Dave's Island Instruments.
Dave Barry, yeah. Steel pan.
But you can.
He used to have a steel pan DVDs.
Yes.
How to make steel pan.
He was on the forums way back too, with all of his prototypes and all of that. I wish that forum was still active, because I feel like that was such the information source. You know, I guess it's all through Facebook now, but I always enjoyed watching that process and seeing people learn to tune and share what they were doing. So
yeah, I think it's not that active anymore.
No.
Sometimes I go there, but now very, very little.
Yeah. Is there a maker that is there a particular scale that you feel like you connect the most to, like a Hejaz, Celtic? What scale calls to you the most? Like, what do you like for scale wise?
Well, it's a very difficult question because I have a lot of the favorite scales, but the moments that I have that epiphany in you, wow. I'm part of this. I'm part of this, and I don't want to do another thing in my life. Just it was when I touched a mystic scale. Yeah, I like very much mystic and B2 mystic.
It's like the one you made recently, right?
Yeah.
Similar scale, yeah.
Yeah. I still have it here.
Nice.
Still here.
It's a very magic. I mean, it's named Mystic, but it has like a very particular magical feel. That's one of the few scales I haven't spent a lot of time with. That one, and also Waples. I've only played a Waple scale, but I've never actually had one to play much with. I think Waples and Mystic both have a lot of chord and movement potential in them, which is the reason why I like the Curd scale a lot as well. Is it has a lot of different places to go, and that's something I'm always talking to my own students about. Is if you don't find a scale that you connect with, it's harder to get going. You can learn the skills, you can still learn the techniques, but it's until you feel really connected to that scale.
Connected, yes.
Yeah, it's hard to grow as a player if you're kind of not really feeling the scale.
Mm-hmm. You have to feel it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think when you're switching from raw, you're still making raw steel instruments as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm still making.
What do you feel like is different between the two of them, tuning wise? Is there any difference between them, or is it?
Yes, there is. There's to shape and raw steel, like shaping. Raw steel, it's like butter. Okay. It's like cheese.
Interesting. Interesting.
You shape raw steel. It's very stable. It's very how to say, malleable. I don't know if it's the right word. You set the place where you shape it and it stays there. And with stainless, it's a little bit more challenging. Okay. It's very elastic. So you hammer and then it returns. And you have to really says to him, you stay here, and until he yields and for tuning. It's crazy because now I'm finding easier to tune the stainless grade that I use than my instruments from regular steel.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Faster, and I find better to tune.
Do you notice any difference in like tuning stability between the two?
Yes.
I'm not I used to be a very heavy-handed player a long time ago. I think all of us were when we started playing.
Yeah.
but I'm definitely a lot more gentle now.
Like from the guy from Burning Man. that level of intensity.
I know. I appreciated his energy, but that pretty rough.
Yeah.
But do you find that there's a difference in how the steel stays in tune over time with stainless versus raw steel?
Well, it's a hard question because I don't know yet from my instrument the differences between two, because I recently started to make instruments from stainless steel. But in the hammer experience there, I find it that the stainless that I use are more stable than my raw steel.
Interesting.
So because it's a harder material, and the way I tuned the notes, I let the notes very tight. I like that. I don't leave what says
there's not much movement, like flexibility.
Flexibility in between cents.
Yeah.
If you hammer, you go down just a little bit and then you go up again.
Yeah.
If you take my old instruments, my first instruments, if I would like to tune again the notes, I will hammer and it will go down very much.
Interesting.
The note, like da 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 da, because it has that more of that range that it can go down and up. Now I don't leave that space.
Interesting. That's actually, I would say,
I like to be very tight.
Your instruments, to me, especially this one, I feel like I like when tone fields don't feel too loose or soft.
Yeah, because it would pound.
Yeah, I don't like them when they blare out. That doesn't.
Uh-huh.
I know some makers are okay with that too, but I like when you hit it that you get the note and you don't get any of that warble.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
but it's interesting playing instruments that are softer, because when you're used to playing something that has a very firm tone field and you go to play something softer, it almost feels different as you're striking it, aside from just the
Mm-hmm.
sound. But it's one of those things too. I think the longer you play and the more you discover different instruments, you can pick up on those little differences in the feeling of the tone fields or the tuning. So that's really interesting.
And you are very privileged to have a lot of instruments from different makers.
Yes.
I wanted to have that experience because it's very different, and I don't really have the chance to play instruments from a lot of other makers. I've played some of my fellow companions here
Yeah.
on Brazil, and but we're in the maker point of view, you will be very good at it because you have a lot of different backgrounds
Yeah.
too.
I think for me the most interesting thing, aside from just playing them in the scales, is seeing how each of them is a little bit different in the approach. Or like on the Siberia that I showed you that time, to control the shoulders, he did that sort of dimpling on the
Yeah.
shoulder. There's all these techniques. I could see that if you only have played your own or only played a couple, that you wouldn't have experienced how other people are approaching it. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and even all my old instruments, I don't have really a chance to compare
Hmm.
over time. Just when returns for returning,
Right.
and then I play for wow, it's very different. I don't feel that different over time.
Yeah.
Like I feel the different, but not that expressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I came, own instrument came for tuning, it's like you if you was making from another maker.
Hmm.
It's very funny.
That makes sense though. That was the part of the process you were in back then, and now you're in a different spot, tuning wise and ability wise. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Do you find that this stainless steel that you're using works well for like Mutant's type of instruments, or no?
Breaking news. I
Yes.
did I did one mutant
Ah,
on stainless.
that's exciting.
Ah, yeah, it's actually my on my Instagram page. It
Yep.
was on the stories.
Okay.
I played a little bit.
Okay. I must have heard it then. Interesting.
Yeah, and I didn't glued yet,
Yep.
but on rings was very nice. Was insane. Let's find out
Yes.
how good. I don't want too much sustain
Mhm.
regarding to
Yep.
mutant, so I figured out how to control that.
Yep.
But I was really happy
Mhm.
to to make that mutant. I think it would be good.
Well, I'm excited to hear it.
My first instrument that I did on stainless was I tried to make a mutant
Yeah.
and went totally wrong.
Oh no.
It shouldn't be so hard to make a switch from material.
Mm.
Went totally wrong. The dinger cracked.
Oh
The
no.
notes were lost. So
That's frustrating. Do you?
and then it's almost like the material teaches you to be more humble.
Mm, that makes sense. I, I notice in making flutes and the instruments that I make, the best instruments that I create are ones where I don't force it to be something. because when you're making a flute, there's the fundamental, and then there's an overtone for the octave. So if I blow harder into the flute, it jumps up an octave, and I can play another 3 or 4 notes. But there's sometimes when the octave and the fundamental note don't match together. So you could do it as a fifth. So maybe you would cut that flute shorter. So when you overblow it, it's a fifth instead of an octave from that. So, but I noticed that when I don't force it to do something that it doesn't want to do, it sounds better. So maybe if I cut a flute in the materials saying, nope, I'm not gonna be tuned to that. I'll just accept it and make a flute out of that material and then start over again with a different piece. So I think it's probably like that. I can imagine it being like that with tuning. Like can you overwork the field? Like if you force it to do something, it just doesn't want to go into that shape.
Yes. On that scale, sometimes I had some instruments that I planned to be as on scale and wasn't working. I had to switch the scale because almost like if the notes had free will. You want it to be another thing. Yeah, sometimes it wants to be nothing, and you have to. Your mission is to be in this scrapyard. That's you fulfilled your mission.
When you're heating them, what type of heat treatment do you do with the raw steel versus the stainless steel? Like, how is that different for you?
Basically, a little bit of time, more time on stainless and hotter.
Okay, interesting.
In raw steel, I use like 350 to 400 Celsius. And for stainless, like 500 and 600.
Oh, interesting. So long.
I'm testing things on stainless. I didn't find yet the right spot.
Interesting.
So still finding.
Do you do it you don't do it by hand heating them? You have like a kiln, or do you blow?
No, I'm torch. Yes.
Oh, nice. I always like the look of that. There's always interesting. I know when you heat steel to different temperatures, the color changes, but
color changes.
I love watching that when people are doing that process because it looks really neat. What is the difference if you were to heat something up to a higher temperature than you normally would? What would be the sound in general? What would be the sound difference for something that was heated a lot versus something that wasn't heated? Would it be less stable or more?
Well, for raw steel, sorry.
You're fine.
For raw steel, I didn't really test it that much to like saturate but I know that the structure of the grains and the material changes, and you have a more harder material, and of course you have a different timbre approaches in how you're gonna work with that. But what I used to do on raw steel was to hit where I wanted, and then fast cooling with water.
Okay, interesting.
That gives leaves a little bit harder material.
Huh. That's so interesting. Do you
almost like tempering? It's not like tempering, because for tempering you have to reach really high, like a cherry color, and then. But it leaves a little bit harder, so it's good in my opinion for raw steel.
Interesting.
And yeah.
Huh. I just find the process so there's so many variables from every maker that change the feeling of it, whether it's the heating or the it's nitrate.
Yeah, it's a lot of variables. Yeah, a lot of variables. And then for stainless, like I said, I don't really know the real differences um, from the heat treating because I'm still finding. But my first instrument that I did that worked, I did a not so high treatment, heat treatment, and in the B2 Mystic, I did a heat treatment that I was higher, and I liked the sound of the B2 better. The volume of the hijas was a little bit louder. But the deepness of the sound of the B2 I like better. Has a little bit of deepness, a little bit less volume, but the sound qualities I liked better. So now that's why I'm hitting a little bit more.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and enlightening more people about the process that these things go through. It's such a complex thing for such a simple instrument, you know. I love it.
And we are just in one topic, just like heat treatment. If you go to glue, like let's say glue, it's another word. I'm testing the Merbenite, that is the classic glue for making instruments, and it's different. You have a different timbre just switching the glue.
That's crazy. That's absolutely
yeah. You can have really metallic if you go for a wrong glue. That like I test one back in the beginning, the process when I started, and you have a really metallic and ugly sound. And if you just switch the glue, you have the more characteristics like of the handpan, and you can play with that. Just switching the glue.
Wow. It's funny that a small thing like that would vastly change the. That's super interesting. If people want to learn more about your instruments and your work, what's the best place to find you? What are your social media accounts?
On Instagram, Handromeda.handpan. Handromeda, it's H in the beginning. The Facebook, Handromeda Handpan, YouTube channel, same. That's my social media.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on. I think it was an enlightening conversation. I think people will find it super interesting.
Yeah, it was a great time. It's fast, very fast.
It was very fast.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Victor asked me to add this into the video so that he could talk a little bit more about stainless and raw steel, so you have a better idea of the sound between the two. I personally love both of them, but I think depending on what you're using it for, you might want a different steel. So we're going to take a look at that, and then we're going to finish up.
Okay, so let's hear the differences in timbre from raw steel and stainless steel. This is raw steel. It's a C on Leo 18 notes. stainless steel timbre. This is a B2 Mystic with more notes also. This was stainless steel, are very different from each other. So it's important to mention that regarding to raw steel, it needs to be done some treatments to protect the material, not to prevent rust. So here we do basically two treatments to raw steel. One is brass brush, and another one it's something that we call the Vitrifier. It makes a little thin layer of protection based on silica. So sometimes people call it liquid glass. So yeah, it needs to be protected from rust. It's not rust proof. You have to care for your instrument, but like nitride steel and stainless steel also that you have to care. So, but it adds resistance to the material. So, if I didn't do it, the instrument will rust like very fast. So, yeah, hopes that I could have helped, and that's it. That was the differences and the treatments that I do here. Okay? Bye-bye.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. It was a really fun conversation, and I definitely learned a lot about his process and how it differs from other people's. If you want to check out his work again, check Handromeda Handpan on Instagram and Facebook, and also on YouTube. Thanks, guys, and I look forward to talking to you next time.